You think these three books will transform you. What if you've been building habits for years and still feel like the same person? What if the people who make it aren't braver than you? They just can't quit and you still can. What if the reason you can't build wealth has nothing to do with what you earn and everything to do with who you've already decided you are? If those three questions made you uncomfortable, it's because these three books promised to answer them and never actually did. You are about to find out what they were really teaching. Atomic Habits, Shoe Dog, Rich Dad Poor Dad. Three different domains, three different decades, and, quietly, the same hidden teaching. Here's the part that gets uncomfortable. Two of these three books are largely fictional. Shoe Dog is a memoir, which means it's curated. Rich Dad Poor Dad's central character may not have existed as a real person. Atomic Habits is the only one rigorously researched. And yet, wait for this. The two less factual books may be doing more psychological work in their readers than the rigorous one. James Clear, 2018. A research journalist who became obsessed with one question: why do small actions, repeated, change a person? His answer became the most quoted habits book of the decade. Phil Knight, 2016. The founder of Nike, finally writing the memoir of how a man with a crazy idea, Japanese running shoes, survived 20 years of near bankruptcy. Almost no one believed in him. He built Nike anyway. Robert Kiyosaki, 1997. A man who claimed to have two fathers: his biological father, who was educated and broke, and his best friend's father, who was uneducated and rich. Whether that second man was real or composite is something we'll come back to. James Clear's central claim is simple: you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Tiny actions repeated change who you are. But here's what most people miss when they read this book, and what Clear himself emphasizes, but readers tune out. Clear's most famous example is British cycling. For 100 years, the British team was mediocre. Then a coach named Dave Brailsford applied a single principle: find 1% better in every variable. Saddle position, pillow type, tire pressure, hand washing technique. Most of it looked silly. Within a decade, British cyclists won everything: Tour de France, Olympic gold, all of it. The deepest insight in atomic habits, the one Clear puts at the heart of the book and most readers gloss over, is about identity. Watch this. Two people are offered a cigarette. The first one says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." The second one says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." Same external action, two completely different inner realities. The first person is fighting their identity. The second has already changed it. Clear's argument: every action is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Clear breaks every habit into four steps: cue, craving, response, reward. Your alarm rings, that's the cue. You feel a small need for caffeine, craving. You walk to the kitchen and brew coffee, response. You feel awake and good, reward. The reward teaches your brain to repeat the loop. Master this loop, and you can build any habit you want. That's the technical claim. And it's true. It's also incomplete. Now, here's where I have to push back on the book. Atomic Habits has a quiet flaw. It tells you how to build a habit. It does not tell you how to want to. The book assumes you already know who you want to become. But what if you don't? What if the harder question is, who am I supposed to be in the first place? Clear doesn't answer that. He can't. No habits framework can. Which is why most people who read Atomic Habits don't actually transform. They build small habits in service of an identity they haven't questioned, and then nothing fundamental changes. But here's where the book quietly does something profound that even Clear may not fully realize. By making readers track tiny daily actions, the book secretly forces them to confront their identity question without naming it. You can't keep a habit journal for 6 months without asking, wait, why am I doing this? Who am I trying to become? Hold that thought, we'll come back to it. Because the next book, Phil Knight's Shoe Dog, is about a man who never had to ask the identity question. He already knew exactly who he was. The question for him was different. Could obsession alone survive 20 years of failure? 1962. A 24-year-old Phil Knight, fresh out of Stanford Business School, presents his thesis to a sleepy classroom. The thesis argues that Japanese running shoes will disrupt the German market dominated by Adidas. The professor nods politely. The students yawn. Knight's thesis received a B minus. That night in his Tokyo hotel room, he decided to do it anyway. 1964. Knight's first year of business. He has no office, no employees, almost no money. His total inventory is in the trunk of his Plymouth Valiant. He drives from track meet to track meet, selling Japanese running shoes out of his car. The runners think he's strange. Most don't buy. He keeps showing up. Most readers think Nike was a steady rise. It wasn't. For 16 straight years, Knight's company nearly went bankrupt. Every year, sometimes twice a year. The bank refused him loans. Lawyers threatened to seize his assets. His wife questioned the whole project. Knight did not stop. The underrated lesson in Shoe Dog is who Knight surrounded himself with. Bauman, his coach, was constitutionally unable to stop tinkering with shoe design. Strasser, his lawyer, was constitutionally unable to back down from a fight. Hayes, his accountant, was constitutionally unable to lie about numbers. Knight didn't build a team. He built a coalition of obsessions, each person locked into their own identity, each compounding their own thing. The company succeeded not because they had a strategy. It succeeded because four obsessions overlapped on the same project. Now I have to be honest about Shoe Dog the way nobody else summarizing this book is. The memoir is selective. It's beautifully written, and Knight is candid about his financial near failures. He is much less candid about the human cost of those near failures. Nike's labor practices in Asia in the 80s and 90s, sweatshop conditions in Indonesia, child labor accusations, factory worker deaths are barely addressed in the book. The cost on his marriage and his sons is mentioned but not examined. A great memoir is not the same as a complete story. When you read Shoe Dog, you're reading the version of Knight's life that Knight chose to preserve. That version is moving and probably mostly accurate. It is not the whole story. And every reader should know what's been edited out before they let the book inspire them. Kiyosaki grew up in Hawaii in the 1960s. His biological father was a Stanford educated PhD who held the highest civil service position in the state, Superintendent of Education for all of Hawaii. He was, by every external measure, successful. He died in debt. His best friend's father had an eighth grade education. He was a businessman. He died wealthy. The two men earned similar amounts of money for most of their lives. What separated them was not income, it was how they thought. Kiyosaki's most quoted lesson is also the one most often misunderstood. Rich Dad teaches young Kiyosaki to draw two columns on a page. In the first column, assets, things that put money in your pocket. In the second column, liabilities, things that take money out of your pocket. Then he writes the word house in the second column, liabilities. Most readers miss what's actually radical here. Kiyosaki is not saying you shouldn't own a house. He's saying that while you live in it, Your house is consuming your money, not generating it. The difference matters. Okay, we have to address this head on. Rich Dad Poor Dad has serious credibility problems, and you should know them before continuing. First, investigative journalists, including Slate magazine and others, have shown that the rich dad character may not have existed as a single real person. Kiyosaki has given inconsistent accounts. The man may be a composite or partly fictional. Second, many of Kiyosaki's specific predictions have been demonstrably wrong. He predicted economic collapse repeatedly. He gave specific stock picks that lost money. Third, the empire built on this book has faced lawsuits, including over predatory seminars charging tens of thousands of dollars to attendees. So, why are we still discussing this book on a channel called Paper Wisdom? Because the underlying psychological reframe, the assets versus liabilities thinking, is genuinely valuable, even when the messenger is flawed and the surrounding business is questionable. The map is wrong in places, but the question the map is asking, who do you believe yourself to be in relation to money, is the right question. Despite all of those credibility problems, this book changed the financial behavior of tens of millions of people. Why? Because it does something very few personal finance books do. It doesn't teach you a strategy, it doesn't give you a system. It plants a question in your head that you cannot unask. Once you've asked yourself, am I building assets or liabilities? You cannot stop asking it. Every purchase becomes a question, every paycheck, every house. The mechanism is not the technical advice. The mechanism is the question itself, embedded permanently in the reader's mind. I want to make one more thing clear before we move into the convergence. Reading Rich Dad Poor Dad will not make you rich. It hasn't made most of its readers rich. The book changes how some readers think about money. It does not on its own change anyone's bank account. The actual building of wealth requires action, saving, investing, learning, time. The book gives you a question. It does not give you a method. So here we are, three books, three completely different domains: habits, business, money. One that's rigorously researched, one that's a curated memoir, one that's partly fictional and full of credibility problems. And yet, all three changed millions of lives. Why? What is the actual thing happening in all three books that the technical content doesn't account for? I'm about to show you. And once you see it, you will not be able to read another nonfiction book the same way again. This is the convergence. Layer 1. All three books are quietly arguing that outcome focused thinking fails and identity focused thinking compounds. Clear says, don't try to lose weight, become a person who exercises. Knight didn't try to build a $1 billion company. He became someone for whom selling shoes was no longer a choice. Kiyosaki didn't teach his readers a financial strategy. He forced them to ask whether they thought of themselves as builders of assets or earners of paychecks. Same cognitive move in three different domains. Layer 2. All three books are also rejecting the get rich quick worldview. Clear's curve doesn't bend until years in. Nike was nearly bankrupt for 16 years. Rich Dad's wealth came from investments that took decades to mature. None of the three books promise speed. All three quietly insist on time. And here's what's strange: most of their readers ignore this. They pick up Atomic Habits hoping to change in 30 days. They pick up Shoe Dog hoping for an entrepreneurial spark. They pick up Rich Dad hoping for a financial trick. The books are saying there is no trick. There is only who you are plus time equals transformation. Layer 3. This is the deepest one and the one nobody talks about. All three books are also describing what kind of loneliness is required. Clear's Habit Builder works when no one is watching. Knight's company looked like failure to everyone outside it for 16 years. Kiyosaki's mindset was rejected by his actual father, his teachers, his community. The work of becoming someone is invisible work for a long time. Other people will see only outcomes, never the years of unwitnessed compounding. The three books resonate so deeply not because they teach techniques. They resonate because they describe what it feels like to commit to becoming someone in a culture that mostly values appearing to be someone. Now I can finally tell you what these three books are actually doing. The hidden mechanism. None of these books transforms readers through their explicit content. The habits framework, the entrepreneurial story, the assets versus liabilities columns, these are what the books look like they're teaching. They're not. The actual mechanism is this. All three books embed a question deep into the reader's identity that the reader cannot stop asking. Clear's question, who am I becoming with these small actions? Knight's question, what am I unable to stop doing? Kiyosaki's question, am I building or merely earning? Once these questions are inside you, the techniques become irrelevant. The questions do the work. And the books that change lives are not the ones with the best advice. They are the ones whose questions you cannot unask. Once you see this, every non-fiction book changes shape in your hands. You stop reading to find out what the book teaches. You start reading to find out what question the book leaves inside you. Some books leave nothing. A book whose voice still arrives in quiet moments. Leave it in the comments below. I will read every one. And in a future video, I will tell you what question I think that book has been quietly embedding in you. Subscribe so you do not miss it. The bell icon turns those reminders on. And the next time you pick up a book, your own book, any book, read for the question, not the answer. The question is the only thing that ever stayed with anyone.